Right, it is Wednesday night. You know what that means. Dynasty Nerds on the Better Sports Network. I am your host, Garret Price, and I'm really excited for tonight's show. We just finished up a interesting week of NFL football. Week 8 had some great games, some terrible games, but the biggest takeaway for me from the week was all of the injuries that were sustained. So, of course, when we have a heavy injury week, we bring in Tom Chris. So, we'll be talking to him in just literally moments. We'll be bringing him on to discuss all of the injury news, what matters, what doesn't matter, and how it's going to affect our fantasy football teams moving forward. But after that, of course, we always take that little bit of time there to make sure that we answer all your questions. So, start sit questions, trade questions, all of that kind of stuff we try to get into right in the middle of the show. And then at the very end, we're going to be bringing in Dennis Bennett. And for those of you that you're looking at your teams and you're like, well, I am 2-6 and things are not looking good. I'm looking ahead to the 2024 class. We've got you covered. We're going to be talking the 2024 rookie drafts, what they might look like, what teams could be looking at certain players, where we think they're going to go NFL draft capital wise, and then where they're going to go in your rookie draft. So, lots of really, really fun things to cover on this show, Better Sports Network, here, Dynasty Nerds, tonight. So, without further ado, let's bring in our guy, Tom Chris, to talk about some of these injuries. Tom, how's it going, my man?
What's happening? I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. You know, we it's Sunday, I'm watching the games and guys are falling left and right, specifically quarterbacks this week. And right in the middle of all the action, I'm like, I'm just gonna message Tom because this is a week that we're definitely gonna want to have him on. So, Tom, I appreciate you joining us, man.
Absolutely. And you're exactly right. This was the week of the quarterback. It seems like sometimes when we have these big injury weeks, it's like there's a theme to them. And this week, it's the quarterbacks.
It's the quarterbacks, man. It's tough. So make sure you guys are following Tom Christ on Twitter at Fantasy Injury T. So let's talk about these quarterbacks because there were lots of quarterback injuries. The biggest one, the most significant one, is the Kirk Cousins Achilles injury. We're kind of familiar with it because we just had another older quarterback that just got hurt, is going to miss some time with an Achilles injury. But let's talk about Kirk Cousins specifically. What's the outlook for him?
His son's a real heartbreaker. I mean, he was playing so well, and he was like, we saw Jordan Addison breaking out, about to get Justin Jefferson back in the next few weeks. Really, really unfortunate. Here's the thing with Kirk Cousins. So we're hearing all this about Aaron Rodgers maybe going to be back for the playoffs. Had the Achilles repair with the internal brace, which is a newer procedure that, in theory, should speed things up, and we've seen that just observing Rodgers walking without crutches, full weight bearing, even throwing a little bit. He's way ahead of schedule. The difference here is a couple things. One, so Cousins just had surgery, and he gave like a shout out to the surgeon. It's not the same surgeon that Rodgers had. Now, does that mean that he did not have the internal brace procedure? I don't know. I know that that's a newer procedure, so I would imagine that not every surgeon is trained in it yet. So
Mhm.
I don't know for sure if Cousins had a traditional Achilles repair or an internal brace. I'm sure we'll find out in the next few days in the media. But the big difference here is the leg that was injured. Aaron Rodgers, left side. As a right handed quarterback, and Kirk Cousins was his right Achilles. As a right handed quarterback, they generate their power for the throw by pushing aggressively off their right foot. So it's gonna be a different outlook for Cousins and Rodgers for that reason. And then if you factor on the type of surgery, which we still don't know if Cousins had that internal brace that's a more aggressive rehab or not. So Cousins is certainly done for the season, no question about that. And week one next year is about 10 months from surgery. Doable, but a challenge. The medical research shows that on average, a full calendar year after surgery, after Achilles repair surgery, people still lack 10 to 30% of the strength on that side that they do their unaffected side. So that's not good because, again, quarterbacks power off that back leg. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Cousins losing some of the zip on his ball when he comes back. He's got all the resources he needs to have as smooth of a rehab as possible and get as close to 100% as possible. But this is a tough injury. It really is. It's the toughest orthopedic injury that we have in sports, and this being his push-off leg is really going to be a challenge for him next season.
Yeah, that's a real bummer there. A guy that was playing so well. So we're going to be missing him for quite a bit of time. As far as the long-term outlook, though, is it a little bit better that he is the style of quarterback that he is? More of a pocket passer, more so than a Lamar Jackson or somebody like that.
No question. No question. That is totally in his favor, his playing style. Like, remember, this is the injury that before just a couple years ago, no running back had ever successfully returned from, and receivers were a little more effective than running backs, but not their prior selves. So this really zaps athleticism, zaps acceleration, it zaps power, things like that, which, like I mentioned, is part of throwing with it being his right side, but he should be able to return closer to his prior form than like a running back would, or like you mentioned, like a Lamar Jackson type quarterback would.
Okay, so there's at least a slight positive outlook on this compared to what it could have been. So we had a lot of other guys, maybe guys that aren't going to miss time. We do have a few that are missing some time that we can talk about. But Josh Allen, it seemed like during the broadcast there, something with his shoulder, or like what's going on with Josh Allen?
So this has been going on for it's not just this week. He's been dealing with it for at least last week and maybe even the week before. A lot of times what'll happen is either an overuse type throwing injury or just like a minor sprain or strain with some irritation in the shoulder. That's what it sounds like with Allen, especially since he's played through it a little bit. These type of injuries are the type that usually during the week we're kind of freaking out about as fans, but then once they get warmed up, they flush some of the inflammation out. It actually feels fine. That's how I'm interpreting it. Of course, we'll keep looking out for updates on how he looks in practice. These days, we were always getting videos whenever a player is injured, so that's super helpful that I can break down the videos and see, oh, do these mechanics look right, or does something look off there? At this time right now, I am not panicking about Josh Allen at all. Of course, that's subject to change as we get more information throughout the week.
Okay. All right. That's good news. We might be getting Kyler Murray back real soon. What's his outlook? And do we expect him to be 100% once he takes the field?
Definitely exciting here. All off season long, I remember there was a report like right after surgery that he was going to be ready for week one, and I immediately was all over that, saying like, no, no, for so many reasons. One, he didn't have surgery until January 3rd, so right now he's approaching 10 months post-op. With ACLs, we like minimum of 9 months, and that's from a safety standpoint. That's from a reducing re-tear rates. Really, we want that 10 to 11-ish months for performance, return of strength. There's a number of metrics that we test to determine if a player is ready to go back to sports, and it's usually around that 10th month that they're hitting those. So he's right there. He's pretty much on track to be what we would expect to be returning now. It's looking like there's a chance he plays this week. If not this week, it's looking pretty promising for next week. And as far as expectations, quarterbacks from a throwing standpoint typically pick up pretty much right where they left off, maybe a little bit of rust from not playing for a while. But
Sure.
from a physical standpoint, they can generally throw the ball how they were pre-injury. The variable with Kyler is his running. So if we look at the running back data, we see a average of a 35% dip in their fantasy points in that first year back from ACL compared to pre-ACL injury. So Kyler being such a prolific runner, that being a huge part of his fantasy production, I would definitely expect a dip there. Throwing should be able to throw pretty well. But let's keep in mind this is not a great team, does not have a lot of great weapons. So I'm personally not excited to have him on my fantasy rosters this year, but Dynasty, yeah, you can totally expect him to be 100% next season.
Good, because that's really what you're looking for. This year, it's going to be tough to start him early on until you kind of see what you get. And these next couple weeks, he's got Cleveland and then Baltimore. Those are two tough defenses to start back against without your top receiver from last year and DeAndre Hopkins. So it would be tough sledding for him early on. But long term, that's what we want to see. I see a couple trade questions in the chat. Definitely, we'll get to those in the midway point in between guests. But I want to make sure that we have all the time to talk injuries with my guy here, Tom Christ. So let's get to Stafford. Matthew Stafford. A lot of people kind of wrote him off after a rough season overall, dealing with injuries. Talked about, is he going to retire? All this stuff. Came back and has had a relatively good season, looking similar to his old self. But now he has this thumb thing that happened during the game. How concerned should we be about that? Does the Week 10 bye play into this at all? What are we looking at here for Matthew Stafford?
And this guy has the longest injury list, but he hasn't missed that many games. It's really remarkable. He's dealing with the UCL injury of the thumb. That's different than the one in the elbow that Brock Purdy had. So
Okay.
basically, what with this type of injury, it's a ligament that helps stabilize the thumb, and the severity of injury is going to be a huge factor here. If it was really severe, he would need surgery. McVay said he's not even an IR candidate, so that tells me
Okay.
it's super minor, super minor to the point where it's not going to make his thumb unstable. It's just it hurts. There's some swelling, and pain and swelling, while present, is going to impact the ability to grip the ball. But pain and swelling is not always going to take that long to go down, especially if it's a really minor injury. So he didn't practice today, but he's going to be one to really closely monitor throughout the week. I wouldn't be surprised if he plays. Now, the Week 10 bye is a consideration. I think that if he's like kind of borderline, like I can grip the ball, but not great, then maybe they'll hold him out knowing that they've got another week to let him really be ready to go. But if he has full grip strength, he's going to play. And there's some neat tools that we can use to measure force output with squeezing, with grip strength. And they can compare it to his uninjured side, and they can know does he have legit good functional grip strength. And if he does, then he'll play, and he'll play well. If he goes back in there and maybe he doesn't have as good of grip strength as he has and really should have not played, we could see some accuracy issues. We could see some fumbling. But as far as the grand scheme of this injury, it doesn't sound nearly as bad as it could have been.
All right. Well, that's good news for people that have Cooper Kupp, Puka Nakua. This went from an offense earlier on where you wanted all the pieces to now a lot of guys are injured, and if you're missing Matthew Stafford, it's tougher to trust some of those wide receivers. So a lot of people excited to get him back. We've got Tyrod Taylor. Why don't we lump him and Daniel Jones in together? Because both are experiencing injuries. We only need one of them to play. Are we getting one of them to play, or are we getting Danny DeVito over here? I know it's Tommy, but yeah.
We only need one, but goodness, do they need one? Oh man, that was a interesting performance the other day.
Yeah.
So as far as Jones goes, they weren't giving us a lot of detail early on about his neck injury, but they recently did tell us that it was a disc injury and he was having weakness in his left side of the arm. That happens. It's not muscular weakness. It's something called myotomal weakness, where the disc material pretty much compresses the nerve, and then the nerve obviously supplies the muscle, tells it to do its thing. If it's not getting great signal, you're going to have weakness. So cervical disc injuries are actually one of my favorite things to treat clinically. And depending on severity, they're not always a huge problem. If it's super severe, people often go on to need surgery. Daniel Jones, that's not the case. He's got all his strength back. He's been saying for a couple weeks now that he doesn't have any pain, and that is characteristic of a cervical disc injury. A lot of times it's more arm symptoms and not so much neck problems.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really is. He's cleared to play. He will play, and this being the left side that was affected, I don't expect it to impact his performance whatsoever. I will say though, if he takes a bad hit, this certainly could come back, and it could come back worse to the point where I hate to say it, but it could be a more severe and longer absence than what he's had this time around. So let's hope that's not the case. Let's hope the Giants can protect him. But when he's playing this week, I'd expect him to pick up pretty much where he left off. As far as Tyrod goes, kind of a scary situation because they took him to the hospital. Now with rib injuries, there's always a concern for lung field or what's called a pneumothorax or a collapsed lung. So I imagine that's why they took him there. He may have been having some trouble breathing, and they wanted just to make sure that everything was good there. The other concern would be for like internal bleeding. So that may be why they kept him overnight to see if that developed. And he was discharged the next day. So doing okay. I don't believe he's been cleared to practice yet, but honestly, if Daniel Jones is playing, Tyrod's not going to play. So from a fantasy standpoint, we don't really need to be concerned too much with Tyrod's status.
Okay. All right. Last one here that we want to get to, Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett, it sounds like a rib injury for him as well. Not as severe as Tyrod Taylor's, but still pain tolerance thing. Is it really that simple? Is it simply just, can he play through the pain, or are there other concerns there for a guy like Kenny Pickett?
There's more to it. Ultimately, that's the biggest thing is pain tolerance. But we need to keep in mind the mechanics of the throwing motion. So there's a lot of rotation in the torso. The ribs all connect to the thoracic spine, or not all of them, but a lot of them connect to the thoracic spine or the torso. And they have to move subtly when we rotate. So when there's an injury, the body's response is for the muscles in that area to just like clamp down and not let that region move. So one of the problems he could have is in range of motion of rotating his torso, which obviously, if we remember back to our physics classes, in order for torque generation, you need more angular displacement. So he needs to be able to rotate a lot to generate a lot of torque on the throw. So sometimes what we see with quarterbacks, we saw this with Justin Herbert and Aaron Rodgers last year, is they lose some of their power on their ball. And I know Pickett's not the biggest arm guy, but he's throwing the ball down the field to George Pickens fairly well this year. So those type of plays we may not see quite as much of, or at least not with as much power on them. The underneath stuff I would expect to be okay, but it's more the deep ball that we may see not doing so well. And if we look at the performance of Herbert and Rodgers last season after their injuries, then Herbert was averaging like 28 something points a game in week 1 and 2, and then that dropped to I think 16 something in week 3 when he came back from the rib injury. Rodgers was similar. Last year he wasn't doing so great. He was averaging, I believe it was 15.6 points, and then he puts up like a 12-pointer in the first game after the rib injury. So especially with Pickett not being an elite fantasy option, I would avoid him at all costs unless it's a 2 QB league. At least for this week, but this should not be something that should impact him long term.
Okay. So anybody else at the quarterback position, because we're going to get to the other positions, anybody else, it seems like it's like half the league basically is dealing with some sort of injuries. We good on everybody else? I know Deshaun Watson is like in and out and that kind of stuff. Do we need to worry about him still?
He would be the other one to talk about. So they finally told us that it was truly a rotator cuff tear, which you could read between the lines the whole time. That's what was going on. It wasn't a bruise. No bruise lasts a whole month. So not only is it a rotator cuff tear, but it's the muscle that is injured is important. It's the subscapularis muscle, which sits on the front of the rotator or front of the shoulder blade, and it is involved in the transition of the cockback phase to the moving the arm forward phase. So we saw when he played the other day, he had 5 throws and none of them had any pop on them. And it's because that muscle, whether it be truly weak or the pain was making it weak, he couldn't get any power on it. So that's why he didn't play last week. And now we're hearing reports today that he actually looked pretty good in practice, which I'm surprised by, but that's awesome if that's the case. I'm interested to see how he does tomorrow and Friday. As of now, I would be not so optimistic about playing him this week in fantasy. This is the type of injury I need to see it from him before I'm starting him, especially because of how he looked the other week when he did play.
Okay. Is it something that would be healthier if he did take more time to rest?
Definitely. Definitely.
Okay.
And this is a type
Okay.
of injury. I mean, we hear a lot about people getting surgery for rotator cuffs. That's not always what's needed. Like, I work with people all the time who have rotator cuff injuries. We treat them conservatively. They get 100% back to whatever it is they like to do. That can happen. But putting them back in too soon where things can get aggravated can slow down that time frame of healing.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. We for once, it seems like this is typically a position where there's lots of injuries. We didn't actually see a lot of running back injuries this week. A few guys here and there where, I may have tweaked this, tweaked that, but nothing too concerning. The only guy that we really have our eye on this week is probably Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne, he had that ankle issue, left the game, but he returned later and had a big play in the receiving game. Should we be worried about this, or because of it being a low ankle and the bye, he should be good to go once he returns, right?
Should be. My only, this isn't even a concern. I don't want anybody to be freaking out about this, but sometimes with ankle sprains, in the moment, it doesn't seem so bad, and usually they're either get it taped up or something real quick that
Sure.
contains the swelling, and then the next day, sometimes you'll wake up and be like, oh, my ankle's all swollen. So with them not playing this week, not practicing this week, we're not getting any reports. So if that was the case, we would be hearing about that today. We're not because they're on a bye. But let's be honest. This bye, perfect time for him. He finished the game. He played really, really well. He should be totally fine in week 10 when they're back.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver position. And the biggest one, and granted, not the biggest one as far as name value goes, but the most significant injury, and a guy that had been doing fairly well the past couple weeks, Kendrick Bourne from the New England Patriots, tears an ACL. We know, we've heard it enough that even if you're not a medical expert like yourself, he's done for the year. There's going to be some time it's going to take for him to ramp back up. Is it realistic that he could be able to play week 1 next year? Or is this ACL tear too late in the year where we have to be a little bit concerned?
So there's 4 key factors that we look for that influence readiness for week 1. The first one is age. He's 28. I don't know when he turns 29, but by this time next year, he'll be 29. That's not exactly working in his favor anymore. It's better than if he was 31. So age isn't really working against him. It's just not working for him as if he was 22. It's crazy how even just those 6 years makes a big difference on healing. So that's kind of a push, is how we'll put it.
Okay.
The timeline, and I want to make this very clear. The timeline is not last Sunday when this happened. The timeline starts day of surgery. And I have not seen that happened yet. Hopefully he gets surgery within the next week. Sometimes what happens, though, is if there's too much swelling, they can't do surgery until the swelling goes down. We saw that with Saquon Barkley. We saw that with Michael Gallup. I think that was the case with Kyler Murray as well. So hopefully he can get surgery very, very soon. If he does get surgery, let's say this week, then we're looking at about 10 months to week 1. That's reasonable. It's doable. I'd like more time, but it's doable. So that I would also say is a push. And then we look at the number of tissues involved. Right now, I'm only seeing ACL reported. I'm not seeing meniscus. I'm not seeing MCL. I'm not seeing PCL, anything like that. So that's very much in his favor. The rehab, the first 6 weeks of rehab is dramatically different if there's other tissues repairing as well. If it's purely ACL, you can be a lot more aggressive. And then the final thing we look for, this is kind of subjective, I suppose, but are they just an absolute freak athlete? Are they a Brees Hall who is playing really well in that first year? Or are they
Right.
just a really good athlete? I would say he's just a really good athlete. So as far as those four factors go, we have two pushes. We have one thing in his favor and one thing not in his favor. So I would not be super optimistic that he's ready to go week one. It could happen, but even if he is, I don't know that he's at 100%. And he'll be probably turning 29 next year. Never really been elite, been a nice player to have, never been an elite
Sure.
player to have. I think he could be valuable to an NFL team again in his career. I don't know that we see him being very fantasy relevant again.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, let's go over to some bigger names that nothing too concerning that I'm aware of, or at least he had a good enough game to get 3 touchdowns. DeAndre Hopkins, uh, one of the best games that we've seen out of him in a long time. What's going on with Nuke?
I loved watching that game. This is a guy that I just every year I find him on my team, and I love it. This year has been a little more frustrating, especially since I had him on the bench this week. But toe injury, limited Tuesday, didn't practice today, and remember they play tomorrow. So here's the deal with toe injuries. If they're mild, not a huge deal. If it's moderate or severe, it can be a big problem.
Okay,
The fact that he did practice in some capacity on Tuesday and that we didn't really hear much about this on Sunday leads me to think it's not super severe. Um, but playing Thursday is a little, I'd rather him play Sunday, but it
sure.
is what it is. So I'm seeing this so far as I'm not overly concerned, but I'm definitely going to be tuned in to all the reports all day tomorrow. Like all day, like I'm talking even sit down, have the TV on, watching the pregame stuff, because
Sure.
sometimes that's where you get the best inside information is like 30 minutes before the game starts. If I hear any rumblings of, oh, he's limited, he may be on a snap restriction, I'm taking him out of my lineup. If I don't hear anything, no news is good news with this situation, as long as you do get the news that he's playing. Any additional news, I don't want. All I want to hear is he's playing. I don't want anything extra.
Yeah.
As far as these toes go, I mean, we've seen Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, Amon-Ra St. Brown all have a toe injury this year, and it hasn't affected their game. I know Ridley, his stats aren't as good as we'd like them to be, but he's had so many like dropped touchdowns or like almost touchdowns. He's right there. This toe is not the reason that he hasn't been elite this year. McLaurin's had some really good games too. He's just also had some really quiet games, and on that Washington offense, that's just what's going to happen. It's not the toe that's slowing him down. So we've seen guys have this injury and still play just fine.
Yeah. Well, that's good news because that was going to be my next question was can I start him as long as he's cleared to play, because there's nothing worse than starting a guy but he's out there and you're like, this dude looks like a decoy, this dude doesn't look fully healthy, he's getting pulled out of the game 2 snaps in. So if we get the okay injury report wise, we should feel fairly comfortable. You never know what could happen, but we should feel fairly comfortable starting him in our starting lineups.
Yeah, as long as you're not hearing any of the he might be on a snap restriction stuff.
Okay. All right. Next one here, Drake London. Drake London, we just got Taylor Heineke in there now, who's going to be his quarterback. We're hoping for better days in the passing game. What are we going to be getting here out of Drake London?
Oh man, that Heineke stuff. I've been asking for that for weeks. Dealing with the groin injury, didn't practice today. So groins, it's a big strong muscle in our lower body, which typically that means it really affects athletics motions. But the fact that it's on the inside of our hip and thigh, it's still involved with sprinting, but it's less involved with the change of direction. So I'm less concerned when I hear groin than I am when I hear hamstring, quad, or calf. And in fact, receivers on average don't even show a decline in fantasy production in their first game back from a groin injury.
Oh,
They
wow.
do,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, they do average missing 1.5 games, but of course that's every injury has a spectrum of how long people miss for based off severity. So with London, if he practices Thursday and Friday and goes on to play, I wouldn't expect much of a dip in his production. In fact, I'd expect a improvement in his production because of the quarterback change.
Okay. Well, that's great news on that front. We know that Puka Nakua might not have his starting quarterback due to injury, but he's a little banged up as well. What do we know about Puka?
So McVay is not sounding very concerned. He's reporting it as he's got some swelling in there, I believe is what he said. Knees are prone to swelling. That does tell us that there is an injury, but from what I'm interpreting from McVay, it's not a very severe one. Like I said, knees are very prone to swelling. They tend to just balloon up sometimes. But something is causing the swelling. So there's obviously something going on there. But a lot of times when it's really minor, the knee just needs to move. They need to get on the bike, cycle. They need to get someone massaging the swelling out, and they need to ice. And then once they get some of the swelling down, it feels fine. They can play just fine as long as there's no structural injury in there that would impact the stability of the knee. I don't see any reason he can't be good to go this week.
All right. Because there's a lot of teams that need him to be able to go. I'll be curious to see how he performs without Matthew Stafford. That'll be an interesting little litmus test there for him. Josh Palmer has been playing really well, well enough that he's been keeping Quentin Johnston, the first round pick, off of the field. But with this injury, could slow things down a little bit. What are we hearing about Josh Palmer?
So, not too different of reportings from Puka, where they're just kind of vaguely telling us it's a knee injury. Typically, when we're getting just knee and not MCL or whatever, it's such a minor injury that maybe it's not even a clear diagnosis of what tissue is injured. So, and they play Monday, I believe. So I don't believe they practiced today. So we don't have the reports there. But it doesn't sound super concerning. But of course, we'll be monitoring it throughout the week. If he's able to suit up, then I'd expect him to have his typical like average performance that we're used to from Palmer.
Okay. Curtis Samuel, not a guy that we're starting in a lot of leagues, but now with bye weeks coming into effect, is a guy that is a helpful bench stash. A little bit going on with his foot there. Is this something that's going to keep him out sometime?
So it's a toe, pretty similar to Hopkins. The difference here is, well, one, Rivera's saying also downplaying it, saying it's just soreness. So again, that to me doesn't raise any alarms, especially since already this season with Terry McLaurin, one of Rivera's players, he's given us a reliable report on his injury status. When he said, I believe he gave us the results of McLaurin's MRI, and he said like there's really no damage in there. So that's hopefully tells us that we can kind of trust Rivera. We know that we can't ever trust Pete Carroll, but hopefully we can trust Rivera a little bit. He's downplaying it, saying it's just soreness. But that said, Samuel didn't practice today, so we'll monitor him closely. If we don't see him practice tomorrow, I'm definitely concerned. But if he practices limited tomorrow, progresses to full Friday, I'm not really concerned. The difference here with Samuel and Hopkins is sometimes when these more role players are dealing with injuries, the teams will hold them back a little bit more. Whereas their stars, they're like, we need you or we're going to lose. So go get your normal snap share. Whereas Samuel, as the wide receiver 3 on the team, they may bring him off the field a little bit more than they would if he was a superstar. That would be my concern. And he's sitting somewhere around receiver like 30 to 40 on the year. So I don't know that I'm risking starting him this week unless I absolutely have to. Whereas Hopkins, I know he's not sitting too much higher, but we know who Hopkins is. We know that he
Right.
demands a lot of targets.
Absolutely. Last wide receiver we'll talk about real quick, Wan'Dale Robinson. We know that we didn't get him the second half of last year, was kind of on and off the injury report a little bit earlier this year. Now reporting some knee stuff again, which is it the same knee? Is it a different knee? What level of concern should we have?
Not giving us much clarity on that, but here's the way I see it as a little bit differently than some of the guys we talked about before. He's a shifty agile. Like that's his game, changing direction, changing direction. That is going to stress the knee the most. Like that's the motion that stresses the knee more than anything is cutting and changing direction. And obviously all receivers do that, but that's like what has propelled him to be in the NFL is his shiftiness. So if he loses even 10-20% of that, he's not super valuable anymore
Right.
until he gets it back, which he will as he heals. So I'm a little less optimistic on him than I am some of the other guys that we've talked about. Add in that team stinks and that he's shown talent and flashes, but never been consistent. Also coming off the late ACL last year, there's just a lot of compounding things there that I don't like for Robinson this week.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. Let's transition to the tight end position. We haven't talked about them at all yet. And I remember it was either the first time we talked or the last time we talked. But we talked a little bit about the nerve injury that Darren Waller's dealing with. And because we were relating it to somebody else, and you're like, yeah, this is something that Darren Waller deals with, and it's something that you've studied a lot on. So talk about what's going on with Darren Waller. How much is age playing into this, injury history of the same injury? What's going on with Darren Waller?
Yeah, and Cooper Cup was the other one that we were talking about.
That's right. It was Cooper
So
Cup.
we were talking about how when there's an issue with the nerve, specifically in this case, the sciatic nerve moving, like literally gliding is what we call it, the body's going to protect the nerve at all costs by sacrificing the hamstring. It'll do it every time, every single time. And that's something I'm very suspicious of when we see these recurring hamstring strains in these players. And we had reports earlier this year that Waller was dealing with a nerve thing when he had that hamstring injury in either the preseason or week 1 or whenever it was. So he's got another one. This is his 5th or 6th hamstring injury in his career. He's missed 17 games due to hamstring injuries in his career, and he's 31 now. None of that equates to good things. We know that the biggest risk factor for injury, there's 2 of them. Age, 31, not good. Prior injury, 5 or 6 hamstring injuries in the past, not good. So as you get older, the tissue does not heal at the same quality that it once was. There's a lot more scarring. It's not as strong. It's not as flexible. It's not as able to withstand heavy loads, heavy forces like sprinting for a professional athlete. So definitely concerned from a rest of his career injury standpoint. The thing is, he's still pretty talented, though. So we were talking about this on the Fantasy Injury Team show earlier today. It's a weird conundrum because the injury risk is as high as it gets for a tight end with Darren Waller, and you cannot trust that he's going to finish a game. He just can't. But he's talented. Tight ends are not good right now, or at least there's not many of them. So you really can't drop him because you gotta, at least if you're making a run, you can't drop him because he realistically could be back in 2-3 weeks. And we actually don't see a drop off in fantasy production in tight ends when they return from a hamstring injury. So there very well could be good days ahead this season for Darren Waller. It's not going to happen in the next week or two. He's already told us he's going to miss a couple weeks, and there's always going to be that injury risk in the back of your head. Like I'm a Philadelphia 76ers fan, and it's like those first years of Joel Embiid when he just couldn't stay on the court. Anytime I'd watch and he'd fall to the ground, I'm like, oh my God, he's injured again. And that's just unfortunately how it's going to be if you're watching Darren Waller this year.
Yeah, it is really unfortunate because you're absolutely right at the tight end position. There's only so many guys that you can even sort of count on to give you points and production, and Darren Waller is one of the few guys that you can count on to do it when healthy and on the field. And so, not having him is a very big blow for quite a few teams. Couple last guys we want to talk about. Gerald Everett, he was a game time decision this past week. Ended up not playing. Donald Parham actually played pretty well in his absence. What are we looking at for Everett moving forward?
So he was we got 2 reports, one of a hip injury, one of a quad injury. I could see how those could both be reported in conjunction with one another. Either way, going to affect like things like sprinting, cutting, jumping, blocking in his case as a tight end. With another week to rest and he's pushing to play last week, I'd expect he's pretty close to being ready. Again, they play Monday, so I guess they didn't practice today. We don't have any reports, at least. So we'll know more tomorrow about his status. But when tight ends return from a quad injury, we do see a dip of almost 20% fantasy production on average, with Everett being kind of a fringe starting tight end anyway. I would probably lean against starting him unless you're totally desperate. But I mean, I'm sure there's other guys on the waivers that are pretty much parallel to Everett. So is it going to kill you to start him if you're picking between him and, like, I don't know, Luke Musgrave? No, but I would say veer away from starting him this week if you can.
Last one here, and I actually haven't even heard anything about this. I didn't know anything about it until I saw you talk about it. Taysom Hill is dealing with an injury. What's going on with him?
Yeah, a hip injury, kind of vague at this point.
Okay.
We'll definitely be looking out for more details there. But that's a guy that, he's so unpredictable anyway. I think we don't, as long as he plays, like, he's gonna have his role, which is purely game scripted. So if it's a
Mhm.
Taysom Hill game, he's gonna score 2 touchdowns. If it's not a Taysom Hill game, he's gonna get you pretty much 0 points. Um, but as far as the injury goes, they haven't given us too much detail yet, but any kind of hip injury can obviously impact top end speed, cutting, things like that.
All right. Well, that kind of wraps up all of the significant injury news. Anything else that you wanted to touch on before we get you out of here?
No, I'm going through my list here. I think we've got about everyone. Yeah, really, really an active week for injuries, unfortunately.
Yeah, like I said, as soon as I saw all these guys going down, I was like, well, this is kind of like a Taysom week. This is a Tom week. Got to get Tom on, talk about what's going on in the world of injury and what we should be worried about, what we should be thinking about moving forward. So I personally, and I know those out there listening and watching as well, appreciate it because it helps inform us on how we should look at these things moving forward. So I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I enjoy it.
All right. Make sure you guys follow him, Tom Christ at Fantasy Injury T on Twitter. All right. With that, we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, I've seen a lot of them already. Some trade questions, some start sits. We will get to all that and more when we're back here, Dynasty Nerds on the Better Sports Network.
Of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coop A Fiasco yesterday
Nice.
when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And since he covers fantasy football, I said, hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year? And he goes, yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL. And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my my roommate and good friend who got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got
Okay.
NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there.
There you go.
NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one,
Okay.
the holy grail of NHL games, NHL 94
Oh, there
for
you
the
go. I
Sega
mean,
Genesis
there.
right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game was.
No, let me stop you right there. So people, VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called a VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta that didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
You don't
and
even
then
need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version.
digital version.
Any
And
of
then you
that.
got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to
Oh,
be
yeah.
always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
All right, welcome back. Thanks again to Tom Christ for joining us here on the Better Sports Network. I do want to remind you guys about the Fantasy Alarm All Pro subscription. Look, you can unlock all their content for all sports, including annual draft guides. Get one-on-one expert access to the Discord, League Sync, analyze matchups and trends for your leagues. You get a lineup generator integrated with Fanjections, daily and weekly rankings, Value Vault, position coaches, waiver wire, ownership percentages, projections, stats and tools, so much stuff. Build better lineups, guaranteed. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers you all year long. Go all pro now and save an extra $100 when you unlock all access all year. Use promo code LOCK at fantasyalarm.com/lock. So great things there. Make sure you guys head over fantasyalarm.com. Okay, this is what I promised. This is the time of the show where we go in, we look at all of these trades, these start sits, all of this good stuff. So let's scroll the way back down to Nathaniel Carney. He said, I lost Kirk in Superflex. Nothing worse than losing a starting quarterback in Superflex. It is really difficult to recover. He said, but I have Lamar and trash backups, Winston, Mike White, Jaron Hall. I have the 24, 101, and 103, and a 25 first. Who are some targets that I should go after? He said he stacked at the skill positions, JJ, AJ Brown, Puka, Ayuk, Downs, Brees, Kamara, Eckler. So sounds like your traditional win now team. Here's the tricky part. I am really, really hesitant to give up the 101 in 2024. Right now, it looks like that's going to be Caleb Williams. And if it's not, that's still either Marvin Harrison Jr. or Drake May. Three guys that look like they are going to be absolute, truly elite players. Now, we expect Kirk to be back next year, so you will have another quarterback. But if you are in win now mode, you got to get somebody that is good enough to help you win the ship. Now, JJ can hold it down. AJ Brown can hold it down. Brees, Kamara, Eckler. Like, these are players that can hold it down. So while you need a good quarterback, you don't necessarily need an elite quarterback. And if I'm giving up 101, which, like I said, I have zero desire to do. I have no desire to give up 101. But if I am, it's got to be in that elite tier of quarterbacks. I better be getting back players like, at worst, Trevor Lawrence. That would be the lowest level I would take if I'm giving up the 101. I better be getting, at that point, you're looking at Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts and Herbert, and you're looking at those guys. Let's assume that that's not going to happen. What I would be looking to do is I would be looking to move, if I can get a guy for the 25 first. That's the first thing I want to do. You might have to give up a little more, 25 first and second in 24, or 25 first and a player that you don't need for your championship run. That's the first place I'm looking. I'm looking at guys like Dak Prescott. I'm looking at guys. I'm a little nervous about Brock Purdy, to be honest. Doesn't have the long-term contract. Look, could he bounce back, be just fine? Sure, but they have nothing invested in the guy. And so at this point, I am not strapping my future to him if I don't have to. So other players that could potentially work, Jared Goff is another one that I like. I think he's going to have a pretty decent schedule the rest of the way. They play inside, so you don't have to worry as much about those later round games. They're going to be playing, when they're at home, they're going to be playing in that dome. So Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, I think were two of the biggest targets for me. One that's a little under the radar that I think you might be able to get straight up just for the 25 first. Russell Wilson. Nobody likes him, but he's actually quarterback 11 on the season. He's been very good, very efficient. So he would definitely be another one I would go after. Matthew Stafford's one I love to get on the cheap, but with that thumb injury, until I see that he can play for me this week, I can't quite justify making that move. The kind of the low range, if I was going to try to go the cheap route, I'm open to Geno Smith. And if I'm going real cheap, I'm open to Baker Mayfield. He's been pretty solid so far this year. And despite having his bye, he's quarterback 17 right now, but on a points per game basis, he's ahead of Matthew Stafford. He's actually ahead of Trevor Lawrence, and he's in a similar range with guys like Russell Wilson, Jordan Love. So he is somebody that I'm interested in if I have the opportunity to acquire him on the cheap. So those are the quarterbacks that I am looking at. The Equinox FF says, would you trade away Hunt for a second? Currently middle of the pack. Side note, the guy trading for him has my first next year. So that's a tough decision. If you are not a contending team and you can give any like rental running back for a second, I'm absolutely doing it. I get not wanting to make your pick better, but at this point, Kareem Hunt is more than likely not going to make a huge difference as far as the standings go. He's splitting time with Ford. He's a decent running back, but any team that is forced to start Kareem Hunt is more than likely not a championship caliber team. So I wouldn't overthink that one too much. I would just, if I'm not a contender, I'll take a second round pick, and then hopefully I can do well in the draft, hit on, one of the earlier tight ends, or I can hit on a second, third tier wide receiver, maybe a running back that I like. There's always guys in that second round that are very, very valuable assets to your fantasy football team. So I would definitely be looking to move Hunt if I am not a contender. Sedated Fork says, when is Brock Purdy going to get Trent Williams back? Honestly, I don't know. Obviously, he's not played great without Trent Williams. I think there's some other things going on there as well, but he obviously needs that time and protection. So hopefully soon. Office Depot says, howdy, folks. How's it going, my man? Josh says, rate my 16-man lineup. 16 guys. Wow. Burrow, CMC, Kamara, Amon-Ra, Jamar Chase, Logan Thomas, Breece Hall, Chiefs, and Jake Elliott. I don't think that's 16 guys, but I'm guessing this is a 16-team league. And if that is a 16-team league, that is a fantastic starting lineup for a 16-team league. That would honestly be a very good starting lineup for a 12-team league, let alone a 16-team league. The only question mark is really Logan Thomas. Outside of that, the rest of the lineup, I mean, you're looking at two of the top 2 or 3 running backs right now in fantasy football. Amon-Ra and Chase are top tier wide receivers. So that is a fantastic starting lineup in a 16-team league. And even though I'm not a big Logan Thomas guy, if there's 16 teams, he's still, probably better than some of the other teams starting tight end. So I like what you have going on there. All right, Pats fan 10, start 12 PPR, super flex, no tight end premium. Young and Hurts at quarterbacks. Javonte, Breece, and Roshan and Chuba at running back. Dotson, Ayuk, Mingo, Reed, McBride, and Musgrave at tight end. I have 4 24 firsts and 6 24 seconds. So a lot of draft capital in the coming year. I know I'm weak at wide receiver. Where do I go from here? Thinking I wait until draft time and maybe trade some picks for a receiver. I know the next class has a lot of great wideouts. Yeah, that's the thing. For you, you're in a pretty good spot because you'll probably want to get another quarterback. And if you have 4 firsts, you're probably going to be having one of those in the top 5, and you're going to get yourself a decent quarterback. But wide receiver is a obvious need of yours, because really Ayuk is the only wide receiver on your team that I would say I can trust at the moment. But that being said, this is a class full of really good wide receivers at the moment. Marvin Harrison Jr. is obviously the tippy top of the draft, but outside of him, there's still a ton, and I mean a ton, of good wide receivers to be had. Guys like Keon Coleman, guys like Rome Odunes. Let's see, who else do we got here? I had my, where is it at? I had my list up of all the guys that I'm excited about. Of course, I can't find it now. But that being said, it's a really good wide receiver class. You have nothing to worry about there. So, but I'm also totally fine making some trades too. Just because you have all that draft capital doesn't mean you need to use it on rookie picks and rookie players. So, totally fine with waiting till the right time of year and then acquiring some veterans right around draft time. Office Depot says, what kind of trade return should I request for AOC? That's Aiden O'Connell, Raiders quarterback in Superflex. Already fielding interest, so thinking about holding tight and hoping his value jumps after week 9. Thoughts? And he says he has 7 AOC shares sitting on his taxi squads. All right. So Aiden O'Connell, 4th round pick from the University of Purdue, a guy that we kind of liked coming out. I think actually even one of my bold predictions was that, I can't believe I forgot about Malik Neighbors as one of the top wide receivers. He looks like a stud. But he was one of the guys that I had talked about as a hot take, a bold prediction before the season started. And my bold prediction was that by middle of the season, Aiden O'Connell is the starting quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders, not Jimmy Garoppolo. And that's the case. He just signed a contract this offseason. Doesn't matter. They're ready to move on. They're going to start who they think is their best quarterback, and that's Aiden O'Connell. So I'm excited to see him play in Superflex leagues. Any quarterback with youth and even a decent chance at a long-term starting job is going to net you a first. Now, right now, we don't know if he's going to have a long-term starting job. So that's what we kind of got to wait and see. You could get a second right now. And if you wanted to flip and get a second, I'm not going to blame you. I think that's a little premature because chances are you only paid a third. So to only get 1 round, you're never going to go broke making a profit. So it's never a bad idea. However, I think when you're looking at the risk versus reward, if he shows just a little bit in these next few weeks, you're going to be able to get not just a random second, but a high second or a low first round pick. And that's the point that I'm more open to selling, because I don't necessarily want to put my trust in a 4th round quarterback unless I think he's special. I don't know that Aiden O'Connell's special. I think Aiden O'Connell is good. I don't know that he's special, especially a guy that is going to be a pocket passer. He's not going to offer you much in the running game. So probably his career ceiling is quarterback 12 to 15. And that's a ceiling. So if I'm able to move on from him and get a first round pick, that's what I'm looking to do. Chances are you are not going to be able to get a first round pick at this point. I would be very, very surprised if you were able to. So I think I would also just kind of sit, wait, see what we got this coming week. All right, here we go. Pick 2 for name here. We've got DeAndre Hopkins. We've got DJ Moore. We've got George Pickens. We've got Jordan Addison, Gabe Davis, and Josh Downs. Whew. That's a tough one. Right now, I am going to go with Hopkins. The connection that he had with Will Levis was an absolute thing of beauty. So I'm definitely wanting to capitalize on that if I can. So definitely still sticking with him there. The second wide receiver spot is where it does get a little bit trickier. I'm probably not starting Gabe Davis. If you want to, cool. I don't blame you. But trying to figure out when it's going to be a Gabe Davis week versus when it's not going to be a Gabe Davis week is really, really difficult to figure out. So I'm not currently looking at starting him. DJ Moore, I do like, but he hasn't had any big games with Beja as his quarterback. Jordan Addison, he's played really well. This coming week, he has a decent matchup against Atlanta. They've been a decent defense, but wide receivers pretty average, pretty on par for what they do week in and week out. So I, at the moment, would probably lean Jordan Addison and DeAndre Hopkins. I think Pickens is a decent one as well, especially since the secondary for the Titans is a little weaker now with trading away Kevin Byard. But Jordan Addison's just playing too well right now. But do I want to start him without Kirk Cousins? I kind of forgot. I don't know how I forgot Kirk Cousins was gone. All right, that changes things, actually. Hold up. Yeah, because I can't trust Jaron Hall. Never mind. Scratch that. Man, Josh Downs has played really well lately. He's been a wide receiver one over the past 4 weeks. He's been playing out of his mind. This week, let's see, what's their matchup? They've got Carolina. Which you can do whatever you want. Typically, they're more known for giving up rushing yards, but man, that's a tough call. Sorry, I thought I was going to be more succinct on this. Let's go with, if I had to pick two, it would probably be Hopkins and DJ Moore, with Josh Downs being a close third. But I would probably go Hopkins and Moore. All right. I see a couple other questions. We'll get to them in just a moment. We're going to take another break here real fast. When we come back, we'll get the last couple questions, and then we'll get to my man, Dennis Bennett, here on the Better Sports Network.
From the Hometown Hero series, Zach Parise.
That is a very nice card, and that's one I'm probably going to have to organize a little trade ski with you, because I would actually like that card.
You got downtown Newark in the background. I mean, Newark has never looked so good.
No, it is not.
We'll put that back up on the screen. I just want to have a penny sleeve ready, and yes, we can absolutely work out a little trade ski for that, because that belongs in a Devil fans collection right there.
I'll trade you the Braden Schneider rookie card for it.
Done.
There we go. The first card for card trade on Rip and Riff history. And it was that easy.
It was that easy. That's because, you know why? Because neither one of us are jerks. And it's the same thing when we try and do fantasy trades. Like, we don't try and screw each other. We have conversations. If there's a fit, there's a fit. If it's not, it's not. We don't try and, like, take the other one over the barrel. So there you go. In a penny sleeve. Hometown hero, Zach Parise. He was among the league's most productive goal scorers in 06-07 and followed up with a terrific regular season with an even more impressive postseason. And then they talk about what he did in the first round series against Tampa Bay that year. So that's off to the side for you.
That's true. And, if this is it for his career, he had a hell of a career.
He did.
Hopefully he comes back one more year with the Islanders, but if he doesn't, hell of a run.
All right, we are back. Let's get into these last couple questions before we get my man Dennis Bennett here on the show. All right, Sedated Fork. What should we expect from the Raiders team moving forward? They dumped the coaching staff. Which player does this benefit the most? Obviously, benefits Aiden O'Connell because now he gets to be the starting quarterback. So I think he's the one that it really obviously benefits the most. But then after Aiden O'Connell, it's got to be DeAndre Hopkins for fantasy football purposes. Things were just not lining up, whether it was the quarterback, whether it was the offense, whether it was the play calling, whatever it was, things were just not working for Davante Adams. So I think Davante Adams is probably the other one that benefits the most from this team. But honestly, I'd expect a little bit of a boost for the whole team. Anytime that you get a guy out that is, I don't think he was the most loved coach, There's been a lot of stories, a lot of rumblings and rumors about who he is as a coach, and guys don't seem to love him quite a bit. So I would be excited for basically all of the pieces of this offense to get a slight boost. Sedated Fork says, also, I got a contender traded for Javante and Jaleel McLaughlin for a 25 first and a 24 fourth. Let's go. Absolutely, let's go. That's all you had to give up. A 25 first to get Javante. I think that's a fantastic deal. He's been getting more and more work each and every week. And, people were down on him because of the ACL injury, and he started slow. We expected him to start slow. It was really even impressive that he was able to go as quickly and as early as he was. So the fact that he was up and ready to go, I consider that good news. But we're impatient by nature. We want that instant gratification. That the second he steps onto the field, he better be a stud. And if he's not, I'm going to be upset. Well, he's been really good these past 3 weeks. I think he's been running back 17 in PPR leagues the past 3 weeks. So a guy that I love, fantastic player, and his role is only growing. All right. Nathaniel said, appreciate the in-depth thoughts about my question. You are all truly the best. I appreciate it. Office Depot saying the same thing. I appreciate you as well, my man. All right. Mr. OG Hippo said, I traded away CJ Stroud for a 24 and 25 second round from the best team. Late seconds sounds terrible. I'm guessing this is a 1 quarterback league, not a 2 quarterback or a super flex league, because otherwise that would be way too low for a CJ Stroud. I am still a little surprised that you would have given late seconds or only received late seconds for CJ Stroud with how well he's playing. But I get it. It is, only 1 quarterback. These guys just don't really go for a lot when there's so many other quarterbacks that can play well. But with youth and how well he's playing, I would have wanted a little bit more, but you got what you got. It's definitely not the end of the world there. Pat's Fan 10 says, Darrell Henderson or Chuba Hubbard this week. All right, so this is an interesting one. Right now, I have them neck and neck. They both have pretty solid matchups going against Indianapolis and going against Green Bay this week. So both good starts. I lean Henderson simply because I just don't know 100% what's going on with the Carolina Panthers and that backfield. I do know that they are giving Henderson a good amount of the work, and that's not to say that, we might not get Royce Freeman here and there, but overall, we're getting quite a bit from Henderson. I'm concerned a little bit about, what if all of a sudden they decide that, hey, we're going to work Miles Sanders back into the fold. He was actually just not feeling well, and so we pulled him. We haven't really heard much at this point, at least to my knowledge. I haven't heard much on this issue at the moment, but I would lean just the safety and security of which sounds crazy saying Darrell Henderson's like a safe and secure player, but he is a guy that I think is a little bit safer in the situation. So I would go with Henderson, but it is truly very, very close between the two players. So any other trades, any other start sits, last second things you want to get in before we take our final break of the night and we bring on Dennis Bennett? If you have any of those questions, feel free to hop in and let me know. Guys that I am in on this week relative to where everybody else has them. Right now, Kenneth Walker is ranked pretty low going against Baltimore. Baltimore's actually given up quite a bit on the ground, and it just hasn't been as much through the air. So I'm totally good still starting Kenneth Walker this week. Mr. OG Hippo says, a few of us were 4-0, and I don't know if he was going to be in first place on this Stroud trade. So appreciate a little bit of the background there. So I am very much so in on Kenneth Walker. The fact that he is not currently ranked as a running back 1 for this week is very surprising to me. I know we saw a little bit more Zach Charbonnet last week, but I would definitely have him a few spots higher than he is currently listed. Another guy that definitely in on this week, Isaiah Pacheco going up against Miami. Yes, they are going to, I think they'll be in Germany this week, but I don't expect that to hinder anything. I think he is an excellent play this week. Another one that we haven't seen a lot from, but T. Higgins. T. Higgins this week, they get the Buffalo Bills, which has actually been the best matchup for fantasy wide receivers so far this year, specifically wide receiver 2s. So I think he is a great start this week for your fantasy football teams. All right. Any other questions? Start sits. Now is your last chance to get it before our final break. I'll give you one last guy that I am in on this week, maybe a little bit more than consensus. Or actually, I'll give you a guy that I'm out on a little bit more. Right now, Derek Carr ranked as a QB1 this week. I get that it's Chicago, but we've seen times where Chicago defense has been a little bit more stingy in some big moments in some big games, especially when they have a chance to win. I think this is a game that they have a shot to be competitive in. So I think that is a little rich for Derek Carr. Sedated Fork says, with Donovan Peoples-Jones getting traded, is this good news for Elijah Moore? Still don't know why they don't throw the ball to him more. I think this has more to do with Tillman. I think he's a young receiver that they want to get more involved. I think they see a lot of promise for his future. So I'm thinking this is more about him more so than anything else. Anthony's saying, I like Carr this week. He's been top 10 past 3 weeks, so he's in. I don't know that I can quite put him there. So let's take our final break. When we get back, we'll be talking to Dennis Bennett about the 2024 rookie class. We'll be back in a moment.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, and they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. I there's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky, an all-time
way!
is number 5 on the list
No
as terms of passing yards go.
All right, welcome back. It's Dynasty Nerds on the Better Sports Network. Cody B saying, I discovered your podcast this year. Really enjoy all the content you put out. Much love. Thank you so much. I don't know what a super chat is. What's a super chat? You know what that is?
It's it's like,
you know what that is?
just
Dennis?
a notch above a regular chat.
Oh, okay.
It's like just a little bit.
Where does like a?
It's like 30%.
What about like an above average
20%
chat?
more?
Oh, okay. All right. We've got Dennis Bennett at Culture Coach on the Twitter, on the Xbox, here with us tonight. Dennis, how are you doing, my man?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic, but a little deeper dive. Apparently, the super chat is just $5 US.
Oh, they sent us money?
It says it right on the comment there. Now, I'm doing
Look at
fantastic. Today is my father-in-law's 80th birthday. And so as I sat halfway across town 23 minutes ago, I was like, I should probably get going. Jackie, I got a show. She's like, why do you have a show tonight? I'm like, I don't know if you noticed, but like for about the last year and a half, I've been doing a show every Wednesday night.
Oh man. Well, you'll have that from time to time. Just a little confusion,
Yeah.
little oddity there.
No, really, it was more of an escape clause is what it was, because she was ready to go.
There you go. That's good. Sedated Fork says Heavy T needs some royalties on that clip. I love the clip every time it runs. Yes, it is a fantastic one. So Dennis, we were talking earlier today about the 2024 rookie class, and right now it's shaping up to be a pretty good class. What are your thoughts overall on this class before we get into, the details of everything? What's your thoughts overall on this class? How does it compare to some of the other classes that we've had in recent years?
Well, it looks really good from the quarterback perspective, especially in light of the last couple classes. I was looking at one mock draft, and it had, I think, 8 quarterbacks going in the first 2 rounds. And
Nuts.
it had Michael Penix in the second round. And I'm like, I keep thinking he's a first rounder the way he's been playing, but I don't know, maybe they're scared. Isn't he like, 37 years old or something?
Yeah, he's really old. I think he's older than me.
But
he's an old guy.
I'm a little bit nervous about the running back class. Travion Henderson was kind of at the top of the class, and he got injured last year. And I think the thoughts were, well, he'll come back strong this year. And he's been injured on and off this year. Last week, though, man, he made the Buckeyes offensive line look like they knew how to run block. So clearly he's a good running back, because through their first, I don't know, what was it, 7 games, 6 games, they didn't seem like they knew their way around a run block at all. That Buckeyes offensive line had not looked great. Wide receiver class looks real strong. I'm still outside of Brock Bowers and I think is it Jatavian Sanders. I'm
from Texas.
Yeah, still doing a little work on the tight end class, but I'm notoriously anti-young tight end unless they're exceptionally athletic. I think Brock Bowers may make that case to be a guy
Sure.
I draft. Laporte has been a phenomenal case study because he's an okay athlete, but he's not blowing your doors off with his athleticism like Kyle Pitts or even Dalton Kincaid. But man, he's just in the right place at the right time, making plays, getting downfield, getting in the end zone. I mean, as a Lions fan, I'm happy to be wrong on him. Keep shoveling that ball to him. Let him rack up those. I think he's on pace for close to 100 receptions and like 950 yards or something.
Yeah, and he's getting in the end zone too, man. He had a shot at potentially another one at the end of the game there this past week, and he flubbed it unfortunately. But they were up so much in that game, it didn't really matter.
Yeah, happens to the best of us.
Yeah, I flubbed plenty in back in my day. So Dennis, let's talk about this quarterback class because there's a lot of names in it, but there's two that seemingly stand above the rest. And for a while, it was not even as much 1A, 1B, but it was a clear here's the top guy, and then here's the second best guy. That seems to have changed a little bit over the past few weeks. Talk to me about Caleb Williams and Drake May.
Yeah. Williams came into the season as the unquestioned 101, and Drake May just has been putting in work. Williams may be getting a little too much blame for the way USC is playing overall, but you expect your great quarterbacks to lift all of the boats on his team, make everybody better. And, while Williams has done that some, they don't have a great running game. Who's the transfer that's there? Marshawn Lloyd? Is that who's at USC? Jerry Rice's kid, Brendan, has been playing well. They had the freshman come on, Malachi. Was that Nelson? What was his name? Not Nelson.
Malachi Nelson. Yep.
Is it Nelson? And and Mario Williams. But it seems like that wide receiver. It doesn't feel like there's a Jordan Addison there at USC. So maybe that's part of the issue. Maybe it's some adjustment overall for the team to Lincoln Riley. I think May's still going to end up being the 101, or not May. Williams will end up being the 101. But it wouldn't surprise me if somebody in need of a quarterback goes up to 2, or if they're at 2, takes Drake May. He's showing that he can get the job done and kind of has all the traits of a franchise quarterback. After those 2, that's where it gets interesting. Who's 3? Is it J.J. McCarthy? Is it Quinn Ewers? Is it Penix? Who's the other third guy there? Is it Bo
Shedeur
Nix?
Sanders?
Shedeur Sanders. Now, he seems like he feels to me like the one that needs probably the most development of those guys at the top.
Sure.
And a lot of it is, again, he's a guy getting a lot of blame for a team that's really not ready for prime time, that has been thrust into prime time because they've got a high profile coach. And so they it would have been a little better for them to kind of, lay low this year, get through the season, then let Dion bring in some more guys on the interior, some, high level offensive linemen. That's really where they need to pump up their defense, their offensive line. I think they've got some decent skill players out there. But I think if you're Shedeur Sanders and you're going to be a first round pick, I think you go to the NFL, and it may work out great. He may end up being a late first rounder. So he ends up going to a team that doesn't have to put him on the field.
Right. Well, and the interesting part with all of this is the NIL stuff. Guys, it's reported that Sanders is making like $4 million a year as a college quarterback.
Right.
So, yes, first round money's a little better than that. But if you think that you might need a little more time, you might not be as eager to jump into the NFL as you once were, because you're still making some pretty good money being able to still hang out there with your brother and your dad and just hanging out. So it will be interesting to see him. I think the 2 guys that I'm really interested to see if they declare are Sanders and Quinn Ewers. Those are the 2 guys that I'm kind of waiting to see. Ewers has had some flashes of just looking awesome. And then he's had some other flashes of being like, I don't know about this.
Jay Cutler?
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with those 2. JJ McCarthy's the one that we haven't talked too much about yet, but he's flying up people's boards. Like This is a guy that all of a sudden is really pushing, the even I've heard some people saying like he might push Drake May even, which I'm not even close to being ready to say that. But maybe my Ohio State bias is showing. What do you think of JJ McCarthy from what you've seen?
I hate him. I mean, he plays for that team up north. I
Yep.
have honestly, since as he's been rising, I have been actively chipping away at my biases towards that team and that player so I can get to more of an objective evaluation. It's week 9 of the NFL season. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm
Sure.
noticing him rising. I'm seeing him, what was it? Luke Easterling's draft had him as the 3rd QB off the board. Draft Tech, I think, had him as the 5th QB off the board. So he's going to be up there. I think the real question comes down to, are there some teams at the back end of the draft that are willing to go quarterback? We talked about Sanders a minute ago. Like, what about Dallas at 22? Dak Prescott has another year on his contract. Maybe sign him to a short extension with some outs. He's going to be 31 in 2024. Put Sanders there and do what's starting to come back in vogue and take a developmental quarterback with high level possibilities, high level upside, and let him develop a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think it's a Jerry Jones pick, but only if I think Jerry can play him, and I don't think it makes sense to play him this year, even if you take him in the first round. McCarthy feels like he needs to have a couple protein shakes and a couple burgers and fries and put some weight on. But he's 6'3", he has a decent arm, and he's fairly mobile. They kicked our ass last year. Turns out maybe they knew what was coming. Maybe
Sure.
they didn't. So
Makes it a little easier.
We'll see how it plays out the rest of the season now that the Wolverine is out of the bag here.
Yep. It will be very
But
interesting
McCarthy's
to
been
see how
playing
that.
well. It's hard to I want to bang on him because he plays for that team up north, but it's hard to deny what the talent's looking like right now, and he's looking like I think a mid to late first round pick.
What teams do you think are the most likely to take some quarterbacks? We have some guys that will be at the top end that could take some quarterbacks, but some teams that maybe are some of the better teams that aren't going to get those top tier guys, but maybe would be willing to take one at the end of the first or even into the second round. So what teams are you looking at, and what potential fits could you see out of this quarterback group?
So there's some crazy teams that like need quarterbacks, but I don't think they're willing to admit yet that they need a quarterback. Like the Rams, they need a quarterback. They've got Matthew Stafford, but Stafford's banged up again. If can they take somebody that's gonna if they took McCarthy I think they're around pick 12 or pick 16 right now. They take McCaffrey there, let him sit a year behind Stafford. I mean, McCarthy's better than Stetson Bennett. Stetson was a nice story, a kid that fought hard in college to get a chance and won 2 national championships. But he's 5'10", and I think Bennett's career looks like it's going to be a journeyman at best. But I think I'd like to see McCarthy land on the Rams and sit a year behind Matthew Stafford and step into that system with Sean McVay. I know that McVay and Les Snead have the patience to wait it out like that, because it seems like they're striking gold with guys like Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua. And so they may be looking to hit on somebody on the defensive side of the ball. But I wouldn't, the Rams at 15 would be a great fit for JJ McCarthy. That's if they rank McCarthy at the 3rd or 4th quarterback. They may have a completely different board.
So something that I think could be kind of interesting, if this guy falls to the second round, which we already mentioned he could go back to college. All things are possibilities here, but right now I don't think he's a top 10 pick for sure, and he might be right in the perfect range for a team that might make the playoffs or just miss. And that's the Atlanta Falcons and Shedeur Sanders. They formally drafted another Sanders.
They did.
And that worked out pretty well for them. And so I think he would be a pretty good fit in their offense. He's a pretty accurate quarterback for the most part. He obviously a good athlete as well. And it would be fun to see that connection once again. So I don't think they believe Heineke is the guy, and they're not going to be bad enough to be in the the sweepstakes for Caleb Williams and Drake May and guys like that. They've already probably won too many games for that to happen, even if they lost out from here. So, but that's a player that I could see being a potential fit, and it would be a fun fit as well.
I mean, and he's a good enough athlete that they still don't have to throw the ball to Pitts in London.
Hey, there you go.
That's right up Arthur.
Let's use him as a running back.
Now, but if he goes to Atlanta, it feels like he'd have to start. Like, you got Heineke, you got Ritter. We know what's there, and it's not championship caliber quarterbacking. I had some high hopes for Ritter. It seems like every game he has decent completion percentage. He's throwing it for like 4 yards a pop. If he's throwing it down the field, he's throwing it for 50% completion. Heineke stepped right in, took right over, did exactly what he does, hung Drake London out to dry and sent him to the medical tent. And it's like, that's just what Heineke does to people. So Sanders would have to step in and play. And I don't know that even in the middle of mid to late first, or even in the second, I don't know that he'd be ready yet. It seems like something that would require a ton of patience and an awful lot of mental fortitude on Shedeur Sanders' part to be able to make it through. And we've seen guys, Troy Aikman, Peyton Manning, awful first years, lost a lot of games, threw a lot of interceptions. There are guys that can get through it and come out the other side. Maybe with the running game, they're able to hide him while he learns. But I like the fit. I'd like it better in 2025 if he got to sit for a year.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you. So let's move over to the running backs real quick. We already mentioned that this class, it's been a bit disappointing so far. Looking at some of the top guys, unfortunately, we have a couple more Michigan guys towards the top. Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, Ohio State. We mentioned Travion Henderson, Trey Benson, the transfer that's at Florida State. He's played pretty well this year. Braylon Allen up at Wisconsin, a real big physical bruising running back up there that they have. Marshawn Lloyd, who we talked about from USC, Raheem Rocket Sanders. So there's some names, but just overall, none of these guys have been just mind-blowing this year. It's been kind of a meh year for the running back position. We feel pretty darn confident that nobody's going in the first round at the running back position, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's no Bijan,
what about
there's no Jameer.
Yeah. What about the second round, though? Are there some guys that you think could sneak into the end of the second round?
Yeah, I think so. The Raiders are going to be moving on from Josh Jacobs, so they're going to be in the market for a running back. The Bengals, it feels like we're coming to the end of the Joe Mixon tenure, and what they're going to need is a running back that can catch the ball as well as run the ball. I think Travion Henderson at pick 49 would be great with the Bengals. He's in the second round there. He has the three down ability. He's got good size, 5'10" and about 215. I think that would be a great fit. Pittsburgh, it feels like they're just trying to get through the Najee Harris years. We still got a little bit of time there. I don't know. Let's see. Is Dallas going to bring somebody in to pair with Tony Pollard? Because making Pollard
I think they might.
it's like maybe Raheem Sanders, a bulked up guy that can be the inside guy. That would be somebody I think that would go real well with Tony Pollard.
He would make a lot of sense too, because we know good old Jerry Jones.
Loves him
He's
from
an Arkansas boy.
guys.
Yep. So he would be a good fit. I was thinking Braylon Allen as well, but Sanders is even better with that connection. So we could definitely see that.
Braylon
as
Allen
well.
is an interesting one because he's so Derrick Henry-ish, and I don't think he's as fast as Derrick Henry. But he's a big guy, 235 pounds, and
I worry he's more AJ Dillon than Derrick Henry.
It's like everybody
That's what I
wanted
worry
Dillon
about.
to be the next Derrick Henry, and those kind of guys don't come along. Like we've been looking for the next Barry Sanders for 23 years.
Yeah, at least it's definitely been a while. Blake Corum's an interesting name. He's a guy that did come back for his senior year, a little bit of an undersized back, but he packs a punch for a smaller player. What are we thinking? Day 2, or are we looking more day 3 with Blake Corum?
I think being 5'7", if he measures at 5'8", it may help him a little bit. If he's day 2, he's going to be very late day 2, but he's probably more of a round 4, round 5 guy. And the way the running backs have been devalued, rounds 4 and 5 are basically late day 2 guys compared to wide receivers. So,
sure.
I think at 5'8" and 210 pounds, he needs to be able to perform well in the passing game, because I just don't think he can handle the running game. The days of guys like Warwick Dunn and Joe Morris and Jamie Morris, these little guys that handled 18 to 20 carries a game, we don't see that very often anymore. Not for consecutive games, not for an entire season. Now, I was kind of honking the horn over on the fantasy football roundtable about Kyron Williams, because 5'10" and 200 pounds, and they're giving him 20, 25, sometimes 30 touches a game. I'm like, I don't think it's going to last. You ride it while it is, but it's not going to last.
Sure.
And sure enough, he got dinged up. But I like Corum. What are your thoughts on his pass catching ability? I haven't dug too deep into him.
I haven't done a deep dive into him, but from what I've seen, I wouldn't say he's an elite pass catcher. It's not somebody that we're like, ooh, he's the guy. But I don't think there's any sort of deficiency there. I think he's solid at the position, but I don't think he's a weapon in the receiving game, if that makes sense. Let's move over to the wide receiver position. This is shaping up to be a very strong wide receiver group for this coming season. Marvin Harrison Jr., I think, even with us being passionate Buckeye fans, I think the general consensus is he's far and away the best guy, and he's one of the best wide receiver prospects we've had in years.
Dude, now, if I never have to hear Gus Johnson call him Maserati Marv again, I'm perfectly fine with that. But he is a beast. He's phenomenal. And I'm not sure, when you watch the games, he doesn't ever seem to put his mouthpiece in. So I'm not sure why he's not getting called for a penalty there. But that's always puzzling. I see, if you're not going to put your mouthpiece in, at least use a clear one so it doesn't stick out. You're using that bright pink mouthpiece and it's just dangling off your face mask there. But I could see someone like, if Denver decides, look, we're going to, Russ gets hot the end of the season, finishes out, and they're ready to move on from Judy, and they're ready to move on from Cortland Sutton, putting Marvin Harrison together with Russell Wilson, because Harrison's good on the deep ball. He gets downfield. He's great contested catch deep ball guy. That would be an interesting one. The New York Giants, I think they may be going in the market for a quarterback, whether it's in the free agent market or bringing in somebody, Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy. Right now in Easterling's mock, they're picking at 5. I don't know if we have 3 quarterbacks go in the top 5 or not. I mean, we could. And some of them are playing good. Michael Penix has been on a roll, and Bo Nix and JJ McCarthy. A lot of these guys are playing well. Harrison would be, I think he'd be phenomenal in New York just because of the market there. That would be an outstanding. Where I don't want him to go is New England. New England cannot draft, no matter how good the wide receiver is in college. If he goes to New England in the draft, he stinks. So let New England sign veterans. I don't care if they sign Devontae Adams. I don't care if they sign Justin Jefferson. Let them sign the best free agent wide receivers. Just don't draft a top end wide receiver because you just can't. They just don't seem to get it. I don't know why they can't, but they can't.
No, they really struggle to get those guys. And the only saving grace, if they got him, is he's the closest thing that the Patriots have had to Randy Moss since Randy Moss. So, they figured out how to use that guy. The problem is Mac Jones isn't Tom Brady. That's the problem.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So with the rest of the class, though, Keon Coleman's come on real strong. Transfer from Michigan State, playing for FSU. He's looked real good. He might not even make it out of the top 10.
Yeah. The way he's been playing the ball, he's got good size. It's almost, dare I say, DeAndre Hopkins-esque, the way he kind of attacks the ball when it's in the air. And you just know if it's thrown in his direction that he's going to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, that guy just seems to float out there. Fantastic player. Other guys, Romo Dunes, guy from Washington. He's been a great wide receiver for that team, and Michael Penix. Malik Neighbors, the only guy that we've talked about or will talk about that might not quite hit 6 foot. He's listed at 6 foot, so he's probably 5'11". But this is a really, really big wide receiver class, but he's had a fantastic season for LSU.
So I am notoriously team big wide receiver, but I am just taking L's left and right on the 2023 class. Zay Flowers is great. I'm going to take the L. Tank Dell, great. I'm taking the L. Jordan Addison, I love it. I'm happy to because I like good players.
Sure.
But all these, 5'9", 175-pound guys, it was just, it wasn't a great class for me. My saving grace in this class is that Michael Wilson seems to be panning out a little bit. He may never be a wide receiver 1, but it looks like he may be able to put up some wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 numbers over the course of a couple seasons. As long as he keeps staying healthy. Talent was never his issue in college. It was health.
Yeah, absolutely. That was always the big
And
question
Quentin
mark with
Johnson
him.
don't seem to be the carrying the torch for team big wide receiver.
No, he's been a bummer. He's been a bummer so far. Last 2 guys I want to touch on at the wide receiver position. Emeka Ibuka, another Ohio State wide receiver. They just seem to churn them out, and he's built a little more compact. Even though he's still going to probably measure over 6 foot, he's dense, he's thick. Former number 1 overall recruit at the wide receiver position, and then Xavier Worthy. He's got decent height. He's going to be 6 foot 6'1", but for him, it's more about the speed with him. He's a speed merchant out there. Very slender player, but a guy that can make some big plays. Any thoughts on those 2 guys?
So Ibuka seems to be just what Ohio State wide receivers have been. 6 foot, 200, 205 pounds, good speed, not great. McLaurin is probably the last one that, had blazing speed.
Right.
But he's got decent size, very good route runner. I hate that he's been injured all year. Hopefully he's back this week. I know they said he could have played last week, but they gave him an extra week. So he needs to come on come on the rest of the season, because when he stepped in last year, he just blew up, and it was wild to watch, and it seems like they just keep coming. The Buckeyes just got a verbal commitment for the class of 2024, I think. The number one overall, or maybe 2025, the number one overall wide receiver, and I think his last name was Williams, and potentially the number one overall recruit in the class. Another guy, another receiver. Whatever it takes, don't ever let Brian Hartline leave.
I know. He is an incredible recruiter of the position, and the proof is in the pudding. Guys just keep churning out top
NFL is
end
what
guys.
it is.
That-
So,
100%.
But Ibuka, I like him. I think he's going to be a plus possession guy, decent speed, can play out, but will excel in the slot because he has decent size. And Xavier Worthy, I think, we're looking at Slim Reaper Part 2. 6'1", 165 pounds. He's fast. He attacks the ball well. He's making plays for Quinn Ewers, and it's a beautiful wide receiver class, man.
It is. It's looking great. As the president of Team Big Wide Receiver, I'd be remiss to not at least ask you about this one last guy, Mr. Johnny Wilson, for the Florida State Seminoles, listed at 6'7". There's some rumblings of him being a day 2 guy. What are your thoughts on Johnny Wilson?
So at his size, I think he's listed about 240 pounds as well.
Yep.
A lot's going to come down to how well he runs. If he can, and he's seen on tape, he looks like he runs fine. But if he goes out and measures runs like a 4.65 or something, I think then we start talking about him in the same vein as, say, Darren Waller. I don't know that he'll play any real tight end. Waller at least does some blocking. But at 240 pounds, Wilson has the size. They could put him in as a big slot / tight end, and he can do a lot of damage there in the passing game. But it really comes down to, when your number is called, can you get open enough that the quarterback has confidence to throw you the ball? And right now, Wilson is doing that. It helps that he's got Keon Coleman across from him. So, they're probably keying a little more on Coleman than Wilson. How does Wilson perform if he's the guy? That'll be the real test. Another guy I think that we didn't, that we glossed over a little bit was Troy Franklin at Oregon, 6'2", 200 pounder, about 180, excuse me. He's putting up good numbers for Bo Nix too. I think right now the question is going to be in rookie drafts is how late does the first running back go?
It really could be, yeah, in your super flex drafts, because we haven't touched on the tight end position yet, but there's a guy in there that he's going to be pretty high. We're going to have 3, 4, 5, 6 quarterbacks. Who knows how many? We know at least 2 for sure that are going to be very high. And then we've got several receivers that are going to be there. So we really could realistically have our first running back coming off the board in Superflex leagues at pick 9, 10, 11, 12. That's very realistic, I think.
Yeah. It's going to be weird because, while we like to build around wide receivers, but you have to have running backs, and running backs are the position of scarcity. So, but yeah, I think we're probably looking in Superflex leagues 1-9, 1-10 for Travion Henderson.
Yep, I think the first guy's going to be coming off the board right around there as well.
That means I'm going to get a lot of him because my teams are going to be real good, but it hadn't been that kind of year for me.
All right, let's move on to the last position. The main guy, the guy that everybody's talking about right now, Brock Bowers, 6'4", 240. So a little bit smaller than your prototypical stud tight end, because if he's listed at 6'4", he's probably going to be actually 6'3". But man, all he does, even as a true freshman, he was making plays, and he hasn't slowed down at all. What are we looking at for Brock Bowers? You think he's a top 10 pick in the NFL? And what team do you think he could end up on?
I think for Bowers, a lot of it is going to come down to like his 3-cone, for instance. Can he change direction? Because and how tenacious is he in being willing to block? So they're going to have to determine, can he play tight end legitimately, or is he just a big receiver? And so if he's just a big receiver, then he's going to have to run really, really well or be really shifty, be able to change directions really well. As good as he is in college, the NFL is a step up. And we don't see a lot of guys come in and perform like Sam Laporta did at the tight end position.
Right.
I think Bowers going somewhere, like Tennessee, the Chargers, they're going to be looking and I don't know if Brandon Staley survives the year in Los Angeles, but they've got Gerald Everett, they've got Donald Parham, Mike Williams is injured again. Quentin Johnson doesn't seem like he's panning out. It may be an opportunity for them to bring in a guy that's pass centric in Bowers, gives them that big guy, and work out there. If he goes currently right now, the Chargers are picking 8. Tennessee's picking 9. So the Saints, what are they going to do? They can't keep riding Taysom Hill. Can they? And if they are, can they at least can the fantasy platforms at least classify him appropriately? The Raiders drafted Michael Mayer. The Vikings have Hawk. The Colts are a team that's looking for a tight end to step up. And while I like Will Mallory, who is a later round pick this year, he seems like a guy that is going to be a 2 to 3 year developmental guy to become a functioning NFL tight end. So if the Colts, who currently are at 13, if they make it up into the top 10, I could see them giving Anthony Richardson a weapon like Brock Bowers.
What team scares me, and you mentioned them before, but New England seems to always want to snatch up these tight ends. That's another one where he could end up going to New England.
And the way New England's playing, they're going to be, they may very well be top 12. So,
yep, it's unfortunately very much so in the realm of possibility. There are a couple other guys, Jatavian Sanders, we talked about for Texas. Another guy that's not huge. Same with Jakeem Bell. So it's very interesting overall this class. We don't have a lot of these freak behemoth guys. All these guys 6'3", 6'4". Any thoughts on Jatavian Sanders or Jakeem Bell from Florida State?
So I watched a couple games of Jatavian Sanders in the Dynasty Nerds film room with the Dynasty GM. Bundle it together with the Nerd Herd. It's a great savings. Just because I saw something and I was like, well, who is this guy? And so I went and I watched a couple of games and he looked phenomenal. If he was 6'5" and 250, that'd be great. But he's listed at 6'4" and 242. So like Bowers, he's probably going to be 6'3" and 239.
Yep.
And that 1 pound is going to make a world of difference because it's a 3 instead of a 4.
Yep.
But as long as he can, teams are starting to figure out how to use that second tight end, that move tight end, as a mismatch receiver. I think that Jaheim Bell, Jatavian Sanders, and Brock Bowers are all guys to some extent that need to go to a team that can do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's get to one guy that might be a little bit closer to your heart. Last tight end that we're going to discuss here, Cade Stover, aka Farmer Gronk. He's been a big play guy for Ohio State this year. He's not the biggest, although he is at least heavier than some of the other guys we talked about at around 250. He's not a freak athlete, but man, he's in the right spot all the time. His hands are really consistent. He's a fun guy to watch. What are we doing with Cade?
So he's a guy that, what I've seen is that talking about the other tight ends that are a little bit smaller, and it's like, are they willing to block enough to be on the field enough to make a difference in fantasy? Stover is a guy that's willing to block enough to be on the field enough to make a difference in fantasy. His agility metrics are going to be big for him. Because I'm not sure how good he is at change of direction. He's got decent speed. He gets out away from the line of scrimmage well, and he's got good hands. He's very consistent, and he fights hard, sometimes to the point of fighting too long and fumbling. You got to stop that.
Sure.
But he is a guy that if he could probably be had in the late second or maybe even early third. That can go onto a team and make a difference because of, he's that glue guy on a team that kind of just keeps everything together, helps make sure everybody's doing the right thing. And because he delivers when his number is called, he builds that confidence with the quarterback. And if he goes to any team that has a young quarterback, he'll start to gain that person's confidence early and start to make plays. He's a hard worker, which, the coaches love that. They want to see a guy that gets in there and grinds. And that's what Stover does. He brings that, early to bed, early to rise farmer mentality to the football field.
Yeah, he does. He's a fun player to watch. I don't know that he's going to be an earlier draft pick. I'm guessing probably third round type of guy, fourth round type of guy. That are your thoughts as well?
With him, maybe late second, but
yeah, usually those guys have a little bit more to offer athletically, but maybe he'll surprise us. Maybe he'll surprise us and do a little bit better in some of the testing than we initially anticipated. So, Dennis, I think that kind of wraps things up. Anything else on the 24 class that you want to bring out, highlight, mention, anything like that?
So what do you think of I'm going to call them the project quarterbacks, because they're probably going to be late day 2, early day 3 guys, the Riley Leonards, the Jaden Daniels, the Jordan Travis. Any of these guys, do you think are they career backups, or are they going to be able to develop into starters? Any of them strike you?
Yeah, there's none that I've been like overly excited about. Riley Leonard is an interesting one. He's got your more prototypical size and build. So he is one that I am definitely keeping an eye on. The other one that is kind of a little bit interesting, just because of his background and how much raw talent he has, but he just kind of seems like a knucklehead, is Spencer Rattler. He's another one where it's just the talent seems to be there, but I don't know if it's all going to come together or not. But things that have
pull it together, and if he can measure 6.5 feet with his arm, he's going to get a shot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, that wraps things up for us tonight. Dennis, Bennett, remind everyone where they can find you and what you're doing.
I'm at culture_coach on the X machine. Go seek out the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. I'm on there a couple times a week talking fantasy football, and then putting out all this great content, dynastynerds.com. Go read it.
Absolutely. Well, for myself, for Anthony behind the scenes, for Tom, you can find me on Twitter at Garret Price. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you next week.